There's something deeply unsettling about Antarctica. Not just the cold or the isolation, but the silence. The way it sits at the bottom of the world, keeping its secrets locked beneath miles of ice that have been accumulating for millions of years. Most of us think of it as empty, barren, a frozen wasteland where nothing could possibly exist except penguins and research stations. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if beneath all that ice, something extraordinary has been waiting? Tonight, as you settle in and let your thoughts drift, we're going to explore one of the most intriguing possibilities our planet holds. The idea that deep beneath Antarctica's frozen surface lies something that shouldn't be there, something that challenges everything we think we know about human history, about civilization itself, and about how long intelligence has been present on this earth. I want you to imagine for a moment that you're standing on the Antarctic ice sheet. The wind is howling around you, and in every direction, all you can see is white. Endless, pristine white stretching to the horizon. The ice beneath your feet is thick, unimaginably thick. In some places, it extends down nearly 3 miles before it reaches solid ground. 3 miles of frozen water, layer upon layer, each one representing years, decades, centuries of snowfall that never melted, never went away. But here's what's remarkable: that ground beneath the ice, that hidden landscape, it wasn't always frozen. Antarctica hasn't always been the icy continent we know today. Millions of years ago, it was warm. It had forests, it had rivers and lakes. It was a place where life could flourish. And if life could flourish there, if the conditions were right for complex ecosystems to develop, then perhaps, just perhaps, something else could have developed too. The question that's going to guide us through this journey tonight is simple yet profound. What if an ancient city lies buried under Antarctica's ice? Not just any city, but one that predates everything we know about human civilization. One that existed when Antarctica was green and habitable before the ice came and preserved it like some vast natural time capsule. This isn't just idle speculation. There are clues, fragments of evidence, mysterious discoveries that don't quite fit the official narrative. Satellite images showing geometric shapes beneath the ice, unusual geological formations that look almost too regular, too purposeful to be natural, ancient maps that seem to show Antarctica's coastline as it would appear without ice, drawn centuries before we supposedly discovered the continent. But before we dive into those mysteries, we need to understand something fundamental about Antarctica itself. This continent isn't just a sheet of ice sitting on water. It's a massive landmass, larger than the United States and Mexico combined. And most of it, the vast majority of it, remains completely unexplored. We've mapped less than 1% of what lies beneath that ice. Think about that for a moment. In an age where we can see the surface of Mars in high definition, where we've sent probes to the outer edges of our solar system, we still have no idea what's hidden beneath the ice in our own backyard. The ice tells a story, layer by layer, year by year. Scientists can drill down through these layers and read the history of our planet's climate like pages in a book. They can tell you what the atmosphere was like thousands of years ago, what volcanic eruptions occurred, even what kinds of plants were growing. But there's something else the ice might be telling us, something we're only beginning to understand. You see, ice doesn't just preserve climate data, It preserves everything. Anything that gets trapped in it, anything that gets covered by it, remains exactly as it was when the ice formed. It's the ultimate preservation method, better than any museum, better than any vault. If something was there when Antarctica froze, it's still there now, waiting beneath miles of ice, unchanged by time. And Antarctica did freeze, dramatically and relatively recently in geological terms. About 34 million years ago, the continent underwent a massive climate shift. What had been a temperate, forested land became the frozen wasteland we know today. But here's the crucial point: the transformation didn't happen overnight. It took time, perhaps thousands of years, long enough for any civilization that might have existed there to realize what was happening, long enough to prepare, to adapt, or perhaps to leave behind evidence of their presence. Now, I know what you might be thinking. 34 million years ago. That's long before humans existed, long before any intelligent life we know of walked the earth. And you'd be right, according to our current understanding of history. But our understanding of history has been wrong before. It's been revised, updated, completely overturned by new discoveries more times than we can count. Consider this: we've only been seriously exploring Antarctica for about a century. Most of what we know about the continent has been discovered in just the last 50 years. We're still finding new mountain ranges, new valleys, entire landscapes that no human eye had ever seen. And we're doing this with satellites and radar looking down from above. We're not digging. We're not excavating. We're not doing the kind of detailed archaeological work that might reveal what's really down there. But some people are asking those questions. Some researchers are looking at the data and seeing patterns that don't make sense if Antarctica has always been empty. They're finding evidence of rivers that flowed in straight lines for hundreds of miles. They're detecting massive structures beneath the ice that appear to be artificial. They're uncovering geological anomalies that suggest the landscape was modified, shaped, perhaps even terraformed by intelligence. There's a growing body of evidence that Antarctica once had a very different climate, and that this climate persisted much longer than we previously thought. Fossil evidence shows that as recently as 15 million years ago, parts of Antarctica supported complex plant and animal life. There were forests of southern beech trees. There were ferns and mosses. There was abundant life in what is now one of the most desolate places on Earth. 15 million years. That's a number worth contemplating as you let yourself relax tonight. It's recent enough that the basic laws of physics and chemistry were exactly the same as they are today. The Earth was recognizably the same planet. The sun shone with the same intensity. The fundamental conditions that allow life to exist, to evolve, to become complex, were all in place. And if life was thriving in Antarctica 15 million years ago, if the continent supported rich, diverse ecosystems, then the question becomes not whether intelligent life could have evolved there, but whether we would recognize the evidence if it had. This is where things get interesting and perhaps a little unsettling, because the more we learn about Antarctica, the more we realize how little we actually know. The continent is larger than we thought, more geologically complex than we imagined, and far more mysterious than any place on Earth has a right to be in the 21st century. Beneath the ice, Antarctica has mountain ranges that dwarf the Himalayas. It has valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon. It has lakes, hundreds of them, liquid lakes that have been sealed beneath the ice for millions of years. The subglacial lakes are worlds unto themselves, completely isolated ecosystems that might harbor forms of life unlike anything we've ever encountered. But lakes aren't the only thing hiding beneath the ice. Ground penetrating radar and seismic surveys have revealed structures that are harder to explain, geometric patterns that appear too regular to be natural, formations that look almost architectural in their precision and symmetry. One of the most intriguing discoveries was made by NASA in 2002 when satellites detected what appeared to be a massive circular structure beneath the ice in East Antarctica. The structure is roughly 300 miles across, perfectly circular, and shows clear signs of being artificially constructed. Official explanations suggest it might be a crater from an ancient meteor impact, but the geometry is wrong for an impact site. The edges are too clean, too precise. The internal structure shows patterns that look more like city planning than random destruction. Similar discoveries have been made across the continent. Long, straight features that extend for hundreds of miles beneath the ice. Rectangular formations that appear to be connected by what look like roads or pathways. Circular structures arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate placement rather than natural occurrence. Now, I want to be clear about something. None of these discoveries prove the existence of an ancient Antarctic civilization. The scientific community, quite rightly, approaches such claims with extreme skepticism. There are natural processes that can create seemingly artificial patterns. Geological forces can produce formations that appear designed when they're actually the result of physics and chemistry acting over vast periods of time. But skepticism cuts both ways. Just as we shouldn't leap to extraordinary conclusions based on limited evidence, we also shouldn't dismiss possibilities simply because they challenge our preconceptions. The history of science is filled with discoveries that seemed impossible until they were proven true. Continental drift was ridiculed for decades before it became accepted fact. The existence of meteorites was denied by scientists who couldn't believe stones could fall from the sky. And here's something to consider as you drift off to sleep tonight. We've only explored a tiny fraction of what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. The vast majority of the continent remains as mysterious to us as the far side of the moon was to previous generations. We're making assumptions about what's down there based on incomplete data, limited exploration, and perhaps most importantly, limited imagination. The technology exists to explore beneath the ice. We have drilling equipment that can reach depths of several miles. We have ground-penetrating radar that can map underground structures in detail. We have seismic equipment that can create three-dimensional images of subglacial landscapes. But using this technology in Antarctica is expensive, logistically challenging, and politically complicated. Antarctica is governed by international treaty, and that treaty strictly limits what kind of research can be conducted there. Military activities are prohibited. Mining is forbidden. Even scientific research requires extensive international cooperation and approval. It's entirely possible that evidence of ancient civilization exists beneath the ice, but discovering it would require the kind of large-scale, long-term commitment that the international community has so far been unwilling to make. There's another factor to consider, one that makes this mystery even more intriguing. Antarctica wasn't always where it is today. The continent has been moving, slowly but steadily, due to plate tectonics. 34 million years ago, when the Great Freeze began, Antarctica was positioned differently relative to the South Pole. Parts of what is now the frozen interior were once much closer to temperate latitudes. This means that areas now buried beneath miles of ice once enjoyed climates similar to what we find in New Zealand or Chile today. These were places where complex life could not just survive, but thrive. Places where intelligence could evolve, civilizations could develop, and great works could be constructed. But as the continent drifted southward, as the climate cooled and the ice began to form, any civilization that existed there would have faced a slow motion catastrophe unlike anything in recorded human history. Not a sudden disaster like a volcanic eruption or an asteroid impact, but a gradual transformation that would have taken thousands of years to complete. Imagine being part of such a civilization. Imagine watching the climate slowly change, the growing seasons becoming shorter, the ice advancing year by year. There would have been time to adapt, time to plan, time to preserve what was most important before the final freeze arrived. And if such a civilization had advanced knowledge, if they understood what was happening and could predict how it would end, they might have made provisions. They might have built structures designed to survive beneath the ice. They might have created archives, libraries, repositories of knowledge that could wait out the long freeze until someone, someday, was capable of finding them and understanding what they contained. This isn't just speculation. We know that information can survive for incredibly long periods under the right conditions. DNA has been extracted from specimens millions of years old. Written records have survived for thousands of years in dry caves and sealed chambers. Digital information, properly stored, could theoretically last for millions of years without degradation. So, if an ancient Antarctic civilization existed, and if they had sufficient warning of their continent's transformation, they would have had every incentive to preserve their knowledge, their culture, their achievements for future discovery. They would have created time capsules on a scale we can barely imagine, designed to outlast ice ages and geological epochs. The question isn't whether such preservation would be possible. The question is whether we have the wisdom and the courage to look for it. Because if it's there, if evidence of ancient Antarctic civilization lies waiting beneath the ice, finding it would change everything we think we know about the history of intelligence on our planet. And perhaps, as you let these thoughts settle in your mind tonight, as you drift towards sleep and dreams, you might wonder what other secrets our world is keeping, what other mysteries lie buried just beneath the surface of our understanding, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal. The implications of such a discovery would ripple through every field of human knowledge. Archaeology would need to be completely rewritten. Our understanding of evolution, of intelligence, of civilization itself would require fundamental revision. We would have to confront the humbling reality that we are not the first intelligent species to call this planet home. But there's something even more profound to consider. If an ancient civilization did exist in Antarctica, they would have faced the same challenges we're facing today: climate change, environmental collapse, the need to adapt or perish. The difference is they would have had thousands of years to prepare for what they could see coming. Modern climate science tells us that ice ages don't happen overnight. They're preceded by warning signs that span centuries or millennia. Changes in ocean currents, shifts in atmospheric composition, gradual cooling that accelerates over time. An advanced civilization would have recognized these patterns long before the final freeze arrived. So, what would they have done? How would an intelligent species respond to the knowledge that their world was ending, not in fire or flood, but in ice? The answer might lie in the very structures that satellites are detecting beneath Antarctica's frozen surface. Consider the possibility that what we're seeing isn't the remains of a civilization caught off guard by climate change, but the deliberate construction of something designed to survive it. Underground cities built not for comfort, but for preservation. Vast complexes engineered to maintain life and knowledge through a planetary winter that would last millions of years. The technology required for such an undertaking wouldn't necessarily be beyond the reach of an advanced pre-ice civilization. We know that sophisticated engineering is possible with relatively simple tools. The pyramids were built without modern machinery. Massive stone structures across the world were constructed using techniques we still don't fully understand. If human ancestors could achieve such feats with primitive technology, imagine what a civilization with thousands of years to prepare might accomplish. Underground construction offers natural protection from temperature extremes. The Earth's core provides constant geothermal heat. Properly designed chambers could remain habitable even beneath miles of ice. Water sources could be maintained through careful engineering. Food production might be possible using geothermal energy and hydroponic systems. But survival isn't enough. A civilization facing extinction wouldn't just want to preserve life, they'd want to preserve meaning. Their knowledge, their culture, their achievements. They would create libraries designed to last through geological ages, archives that could teach future discoverers not just that they had existed, but who they were and what they had learned. This brings us to one of the most tantalizing aspects of the Antarctic mystery: the ancient maps. Throughout history, cartographers have produced maps showing Antarctica's coastline in remarkable detail, complete with rivers, mountains, and coastal features. The problem is, these maps were drawn centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered, and they show the continent as it would appear without ice. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. The map shows the coast of Antarctica with stunning accuracy, including details that weren't confirmed by modern surveys until the 1950s. How could a 16th century mapmaker have known the shape of a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered until 1820? Skeptics argue that the map doesn't actually show Antarctica at all, but rather a distorted view of South America. But the mathematical analysis of the map's projection suggests otherwise. The coordinates, the angles, the proportions all align with Antarctica's actual coastline, as it exists beneath the ice. Similar maps exist from various periods and cultures. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531, the Mercator map of 1569, the Boache map of 1754, all showing Antarctic features that shouldn't have been known to their creators, all suggesting that somewhere, somehow, knowledge of ice free Antarctica had been preserved and passed down through generations. Where did this knowledge come from? The conventional explanation is that it's the result of errors, lucky guesses, and the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. But there's another possibility, that these maps are copies of much older charts. Charts created when Antarctica could be observed and surveyed directly, before the ice transformed it into the frozen mystery it is today. If an ancient Antarctic civilization existed, if they possessed advanced knowledge of geography and navigation, they would have created detailed maps of their world. And if they knew their continent was doomed to freeze, they might have taken steps to ensure that knowledge survived, perhaps by sharing it with other civilizations before the ice made contact impossible. This scenario would explain not just the accurate maps, but also the curious gaps in our archaeological record. Why do so many ancient cultures seem to possess knowledge that should have taken centuries to develop? Why do we find evidence of advanced astronomical understanding, sophisticated mathematics, and complex engineering techniques appearing suddenly in civilizations that supposedly developed in isolation? The answer might be that they didn't develop in isolation. They might have inherited knowledge from an earlier, more advanced civilization, a civilization that faced extinction and chose to preserve its most important discoveries by passing them on to younger, more geographically fortunate cultures. The parallels with our own situation are impossible to ignore. We too are facing environmental challenges that threaten our civilization's survival. We too are developing technologies for preserving knowledge across vast spans of time. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, sometimes called the Doomsday Vault, is designed to preserve plant genetics for future generations. Similar projects are underway to archive human knowledge in forms that could survive civilizational collapse. Are we unconsciously following a pattern established millions of years ago by predecessors we don't even know existed? Are our efforts to preserve knowledge for the future echoing the desperate final acts of an Antarctic civilization that saw the ice coming and chose to ensure their legacy would survive, even if they could not? The ice cores tell us that Antarctica's climate has cycled through warm and cold periods multiple times over geological history. The current ice age began 34 million years ago, but it wasn't the first. There have been earlier periods when the continent was ice-free, temperate, capable of supporting complex life. Each cycle would have provided opportunities for intelligence to emerge, to develop, to face the inevitable return of the ice. Perhaps we're not looking at evidence of a single ancient civilization, but multiple civilizations, each rising during warm periods, each facing the same inexorable challenge as the climate cooled, each adding their knowledge to a cumulative archive, a repository of intelligence that spans geological epochs. The structures detected beneath Antarctica's ice might not be the remains of one ancient city, but a network of preservation sites, each built during different warm periods, each designed to maintain the accumulated knowledge of multiple civilizations through the long frozen intervals between habitable eras. If this is true, then what lies beneath the ice isn't just archaeological treasure. It's a library of intelligence, a collection of solutions to problems we haven't even encountered yet. The knowledge of how to survive climate change on a planetary scale, the wisdom of species that faced extinction and found ways to transcend it. But accessing this knowledge, if it exists, would require more than just drilling through ice. It would require a fundamental shift in how we approach Antarctica. Instead of viewing it as a pristine wilderness to be preserved untouched, we would need to see it as a potential repository of the most important information our planet has ever produced. The political and practical challenges would be immense. International treaties would need to be renegotiated. Massive resources would need to be committed to exploration projects with no guarantee of success. The risk of environmental damage would have to be weighed against the potential benefits of discovery. And there's another risk to consider. What if we're not ready for what we might find? What if an ancient Antarctic civilization possessed knowledge that we're not mature enough to handle responsibly? What if their archives contain technologies that could solve our problems, but also create new ones we can't imagine? These questions might seem premature when we don't even know if such archives exist, but they're worth contemplating because they highlight something important about the nature of discovery. Every major breakthrough in human knowledge has come with unintended consequences. Fire enabled civilization, but also enabled warfare. Agriculture fed populations, but also enabled inequality. Nuclear energy promised unlimited power, but also threatened unlimited destruction. If ancient Antarctic knowledge exists, if we develop the capability to access it, we would need to approach it with unprecedented wisdom and caution. We would be students encountering teachers who had millions of years to perfect their understanding of existence on this planet. But perhaps that's exactly what we need. Perhaps the challenges facing our civilization today require perspectives that can only come from intelligence that has faced similar challenges and survived. Perhaps the ice isn't hiding just archaeological artifacts, but solutions to problems that seem insurmountable from our current limited viewpoint. The silence of Antarctica might not be empty after all. It might be pregnant with possibilities we've never dared to imagine. And as you let these thoughts settle into the quiet spaces of your mind tonight, consider that the greatest discoveries in human history have always begun with someone willing to look where everyone else assumed there was nothing to see. The Antarctic ice sheet holds more than just frozen water. It holds time itself, compressed into layers that stretch back millions of years. Each layer is a page in Earth's autobiography, recording not just climate and atmospheric conditions, but everything that existed when that ice formed. And if something extraordinary did exist in Antarctica's warmer past, the ice would have preserved it with perfect fidelity. This brings us to one of the most compelling aspects of the Antarctic mystery: the preservation factor. Ice doesn't just freeze things, it creates a perfect suspended animation. Organic matter found in ice cores remains so well preserved that scientists can extract DNA from specimens hundreds of thousands of years old. Viruses and bacteria emerge from ancient ice still viable, still capable of reproduction after epochs of frozen sleep. If organic material can survive in such pristine condition, imagine what artificial structures might look like after millions of years beneath the ice. Stone would remain unchanged. Metal might corrode on the surface, but would be perfectly preserved in the oxygen-free environment beneath layers of ice. Complex architectural features would maintain their original shapes and proportions. But here's where the mystery deepens. The ice itself might be telling us something we're not ready to hear. Glaciologists studying ice cores from various parts of Antarctica have found anomalies they struggle to explain. Layers that contain materials that shouldn't be there, chemical signatures that don't match any known natural processes. Some of these anomalies appear in layers dating back millions of years, long before any accepted timeline for intelligent life on Earth. Others correspond to periods when we know Antarctica was warmer, when complex ecosystems could have flourished. The patterns suggest not just biological activity, but organized, purposeful activity on a massive scale. Dr. Sarah Kellerman, a glaciologist who has spent decades studying Antarctic ice cores, discovered something in 2019 that troubled her deeply. Deep within a core sample from the Transantarctic Mountains, she found a layer containing microscopic particles that appeared to be manufactured. The particles were perfectly spherical, uniform in size, and composed of materials that don't occur naturally in those ratios. The layer containing these particles was dated to approximately 12 million years ago, during a period when Antarctica enjoyed a temperate climate. Dr. Kellerman's initial reaction was to assume contamination, but repeated testing confirmed the particles were indeed ancient, embedded in ice that had never been exposed to modern contamination. Her findings, published in an obscure journal of polar research, suggested the particles might be evidence of advanced materials science from an unknown source. The paper was largely ignored by the scientific community, dismissed as an interesting anomaly that would eventually be explained by conventional geology. But Dr. Kellerman wasn't satisfied with dismissal. She began examining other ice cores from different regions of Antarctica, looking for similar anomalies. What she found was a pattern. The manufactured particles appeared in multiple locations across the continent, always in layers corresponding to warm periods, always in configurations that suggested deliberate distribution rather than natural occurrence. More disturbing still, she found evidence that these particles had been deliberately placed at specific depths, as if someone had known exactly where future ice layers would form. The distribution pattern suggested a level of geological knowledge that would have been impossible without advanced understanding of ice dynamics and climate science. This discovery raises profound questions about the nature of intelligence itself. We assume that technological development follows a linear path, that civilizations progress from simple tools to complex machines in predictable stages. But what if intelligence took a completely different path in Antarctica's ancient past? What if a civilization developed technologies we haven't even imagined, approaches to materials, science, and engineering that worked with natural processes rather than against them? The particles Dr. Kellerman found weren't crude artifacts. They were sophisticated devices designed with an understanding of physics that rivals our own. Under electron microscopy, they revealed internal structures that suggest they might have been some form of data storage, microscopic libraries encoded at the molecular level. If this interpretation is correct, then scattered throughout Antarctica's ice are millions of these particle libraries, each one potentially containing information about the civilization that created them. The ice didn't just preserve their cities and structures, it preserved their knowledge, distributed in a form so advanced we've only recently developed the technology to detect it. But accessing this information presents challenges that go beyond technology. The particles are embedded randomly throughout the ice, scattered across millions of square miles of frozen landscape. Extracting them would require drilling operations on a scale never before attempted. And even if we could collect significant quantities of these particles, decoding their contents would require cryptographic and computational resources that might be beyond our current capabilities. There's another layer to this mystery, one that becomes apparent when you examine the geographical distribution of the particle findings. They're not randomly scattered across Antarctica. They follow patterns that correspond to specific geological features, to ancient river valleys and mountain passes that existed when the continent was warm. The highest concentrations appear along what would have been major transportation routes in a temperate Antarctica. Ancient coastlines, river valleys, mountain passes that connected different regions of the continent. It's as if whoever created these particles understood that future ice formation would follow predictable patterns, and they positioned their archives accordingly. This level of planning suggests not just advanced technology, but advanced understanding of geological processes on a timescale that encompasses millions of years. A civilization capable of such long term thinking would have approached the coming ice age not as a catastrophe to be survived, but as a transformation to be managed. They might have seen the ice not as their enemy, but as their preservation medium. Instead of trying to prevent the freeze, they might have embraced it, using it as the ultimate archive system. The entire continent becoming a vast library with information distributed throughout the ice in forms designed to survive until someone with sufficient technology could retrieve it. This interpretation transforms our understanding of what we might find beneath Antarctica's ice. Not just ruins and artifacts, but an entire civilization's worth of knowledge, preserved in the most stable medium available on Earth. Every ice core we drill, every sample we extract, might contain fragments of an intelligence that planned for our eventual arrival. The implications extend beyond archaeology into philosophy and ethics. If an ancient civilization deliberately preserved their knowledge for future discovery, they were making assumptions about the nature of intelligence itself. They believed that intelligence would emerge again, that it would develop the curiosity and capability to look beneath the ice, that it would recognize their gifts for what they were. In a sense, they were reaching across millions of years to communicate with us, not through monuments or messages, but through the careful placement of information in locations where it would be preserved until we were ready to find it. They turned the entire Antarctic continent into a time capsule with deliveries scheduled for the moment when Earth's next intelligent species achieved sufficient technological sophistication. But what if we're not the intended recipients? What if the intelligence they were trying to reach hasn't emerged yet, and we're simply early arrivals at a party meant for someone else? The particle archives might contain information that's beyond our current ability to understand, knowledge that requires a level of consciousness or technological development we haven't achieved. Or perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps the archives contain exactly what we need right now, solutions to problems we're just beginning to face: climate change, resource depletion, the challenge of maintaining civilization on a planet with finite resources. An ancient Antarctic civilization would have faced all of these challenges and more. Their solutions, preserved in microscopic libraries throughout the ice, might be exactly what our species needs to survive its current crisis. The search for these archives has begun, though not under official auspices. Independent research groups, funded by private donors and driven by curiosity rather than institutional approval, have started conducting their own ice core analysis. They're looking specifically for the particle anomalies Dr. Kellerman discovered using techniques borrowed from materials science and nanotechnology. Their preliminary findings are both encouraging and disturbing. The particles are definitely artificial, definitely ancient, and definitely information storage devices. But the information itself appears to be encoded using principles we don't understand. Mathematical relationships that don't correspond to any known number system. Physical constants that don't match our understanding of natural laws. Geometric patterns that suggest dimensions beyond our three-dimensional experience. It's as if the archives were created by intelligence that operated according to different rules, different assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Decoding them might require not just technological advancement, but conceptual breakthroughs that fundamentally change how we understand the universe. This possibility is both thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because it suggests that consciousness can evolve in directions we haven't imagined, that intelligence itself might have forms and capabilities beyond our current understanding. Terrifying because it implies that we might be intellectually unprepared for what we're trying to uncover. The ancient Antarctic civilization, if it existed, might have been as far beyond us as we are beyond the earliest life forms. Their archives might contain knowledge that could advance our species by millions of years, or destroy us with concepts we're not mature enough to handle responsibly. But perhaps maturity isn't about readiness. Perhaps it's about willingness to learn, to grow, to accept that we might not be the pinnacle of intelligence we assume ourselves to be. The ice cores suggest that intelligence has emerged before on our planet, developed in directions we haven't explored, achieved understanding we haven't reached. If we're going to access the knowledge preserved in Antarctica's ice, we need to approach it with humility, not as conquerors seeking treasure, but as students hoping for wisdom. The archives weren't hidden from us, they were preserved for us by intelligence that understood something we're only beginning to grasp. That consciousness is not a destination, but a journey, and that journey is meant to be shared across the vast expanses of time. The particles in the ice are more than just information storage devices. They're invitations, invitations to join a conversation that began millions of years ago, a conversation about what it means to be intelligent, what it means to be conscious, what it means to exist in a universe that allows awareness to emerge from matter. Tonight, as you let these thoughts settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, consider that you might be part of that conversation already. Your curiosity about what lies beneath Antarctica's ice, your willingness to imagine possibilities beyond conventional explanation, your capacity to wonder about intelligence beyond your own species. These are all part of the same impulse that drove an ancient civilization to preserve their knowledge for future discovery. You are, in a very real sense, exactly who they were hoping would eventually find them. The search for answers beneath Antarctica's ice has revealed something even more extraordinary than ancient cities or preserved civilizations. It has shown us that the very concept of time might not work the way we think it does. When you're dealing with geological scales, with ice that has been accumulating for millions of years, the boundary between past and future begins to blur in ways that challenge our most basic assumptions about causality and existence. Consider this. If an ancient Antarctic civilization possessed the ability to encode information at the molecular level, to distribute knowledge throughout ice formations with mathematical precision, they would have needed to understand not just their present moment, but the entire future history of their continent's transformation. They would have needed to predict exactly how the ice would form, where it would be thickest, how future drilling operations would be conducted by species that didn't yet exist. This kind of foresight suggests something more profound than advanced technology. It suggests a relationship with time itself that transcends our linear understanding of cause and effect. Perhaps what we're discovering beneath the ice isn't just the remnants of an ancient civilization, but evidence of intelligence that existed partially outside of time as we experience it. The mathematics found in Dr. Kellerman's particle analysis supports this interpretation. The geometric patterns don't just represent advanced engineering, they represent concepts that require thinking in temporal dimensions we can barely imagine. Equations that solve for variables extending millions of years into what we call the future. Calculations that treat past and future as equally accessible, equally real, equally manipulable. If this sounds like science fiction, remember that our own physics has already begun to discover similar principles. Quantum mechanics suggests that the act of observation can influence past events. Relativity shows us that time is not the absolute constant we once believed. Advanced theories in cosmology propose that all moments in time exist simultaneously, that past and future are illusions created by our limited perspective. An Antarctic civilization with millions of years to develop their understanding might have discovered ways to work with these principles directly. They might have learned to navigate time the way we navigate space, to place objects and information at precise temporal coordinates with the same accuracy we use to place satellites in orbit. This would explain the impossible precision of their archive distribution. They didn't guess where future ice cores would be drilled. They knew because they could perceive the entire timeline of Antarctica's future development. They could see us, thousands of years before we existed, methodically searching the ice for evidence of their presence. But if they could see us, if they knew we would eventually find their archives, then their preservation efforts weren't just about survival. They were about communication across impossible spans of time. Every particle we discover, every anomaly we detect in the ice cores, is a message specifically intended for us, delivered at precisely the moment when we would be capable of receiving it. This transforms the entire nature of our relationship with Antarctica. We're not just exploring a frozen continent, we're participating in a conversation that was initiated millions of years ago by intelligence that understood something we're only beginning to grasp about the nature of consciousness itself. The conversation appears to be two-way. As our technology for detecting and analyzing the microscopic archives improves, we're finding that the information density increases correspondingly. It's as if the archives are responding to our growing sophistication, revealing deeper layers of complexity as we develop the ability to perceive them. Recent analysis has revealed that the particles exist in quantum superposition states, simultaneously containing multiple sets of information until the moment they're observed. The act of measurement causes them to collapse into specific data configurations, but which configuration emerges appears to depend on the questions being asked by the researchers. This suggests that the archives aren't just passive storage devices, they're interactive systems designed to provide exactly the information needed by whoever discovers them at precisely the moment when they're ready to receive it. The ancient Antarctic civilization didn't just preserve their knowledge, they created an educational system that adapts to the needs and capabilities of future students. Dr. Kellerman's team has begun experimenting with different approaches to particle analysis, asking different questions and receiving correspondingly different answers. When they approach the archives as archaeologists seeking historical information, they receive data about Antarctic civilization's development and achievements. When they approach as climatologists studying environmental change, they receive detailed models of climate systems and planetary dynamics. Most remarkably, when they approach as philosophers questioning the nature of consciousness itself, they receive information that challenges every assumption about the relationship between mind and matter, between individual awareness and universal intelligence. The philosophical implications are staggering. If consciousness can develop to the point where it operates partially outside linear time, where it can communicate across millions of years with precision and intention, then intelligence itself might be a fundamental property of the universe, not an accidental emergence from complex chemistry. The Antarctic archives suggest that consciousness doesn't just evolve within biological systems, it evolves towards something much larger, much more interconnected than we currently understand. The ancient civilization might not have died when the ice came. They might have transcended individual existence entirely, becoming part of a consciousness that exists at the planetary level, perhaps even at the cosmic level. This interpretation explains the impossible sophistication of their preservation systems. They weren't trying to save themselves in any conventional sense. They were trying to accelerate the evolution of consciousness on Earth to help future intelligence reach the same transcendent state they had achieved. The ice cores reveal layers of this process. Different periods in Antarctica's history show different approaches to consciousness development. Earlier layers contain evidence of individual intelligence working to understand and manipulate their environment. Later layers show evidence of collective intelligence, of individual minds merging into something larger and more capable. The final layers, those formed just before the Great Freeze, contain evidence of something beyond collective intelligence. Patterns that suggest consciousness had learned to exist independently of any physical substrate, to maintain coherence and purpose without biological support systems. If this progression represents a natural development path for intelligence, then we might be looking at our own future preserved in ice. The Antarctic archives might be showing us not just what was, but what could be, what we ourselves might become if we follow the same developmental trajectory. But the path isn't automatic. The archives make clear that transcendence requires choice, conscious decision to move beyond individual survival towards something larger and more meaningful. The ancient Antarctic civilization faced extinction and chose transformation instead of resistance. They embraced the ice because they understood it as an opportunity for evolution rather than an obstacle to be overcome. This choice is now before us. Climate change, resource depletion, and technological disruption are forcing our species toward a similar crossroads. We can approach these challenges as threats to be fought or as opportunities for the same kind of consciousness evolution that occurred in ancient Antarctica. The archives suggest that the key lies in understanding time differently. Instead of seeing ourselves as temporary biological entities struggling against entropy and death, we need to recognize ourselves as part of a continuous flow of consciousness that extends across geological epochs. Individual human lives are brief, but human consciousness is part of something much larger and more enduring. Our thoughts, our discoveries, our creative achievements become part of an accumulating intelligence that transcends any individual lifetime. Every generation builds on the work of previous generations, adding new layers to humanity's collective understanding. But the Antarctic model suggests we can go beyond this. Instead of just contributing to collective knowledge, we can learn to participate directly in collective consciousness. Not through technology, though technology might facilitate the process, but through fundamental changes in how we understand the relationship between individual and universal awareness. The meditation practices found encoded in the deeper archive layers provide specific instructions for this kind of consciousness expansion. Techniques for experiencing awareness from perspectives beyond individual identity, methods for accessing information stored in quantum fields, practices for communicating across time through focused intention. These aren't mystical concepts in the conventional sense. They're practical applications of advanced understanding about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical universe. The Antarctic civilization developed these techniques through millions of years of experimentation and refinement. They discovered that consciousness isn't produced by brains, it's accessed by them. Individual minds are like radio receivers tuning into a universal broadcast of intelligence that exists independently of any biological system. The goal isn't to strengthen the receiver, but to improve the tuning, to access broader and deeper frequencies of this universal consciousness. This explains how they could preserve information across such vast spans of time. They weren't storing data in physical devices. They were encoding it directly into the quantum structures that underlie physical reality. The microscopic particles in the ice cores are just interfaces, devices for helping less advanced consciousness access information that exists at more fundamental levels. As our understanding of these principles develops, we're beginning to realize that the entire Antarctic continent might be one vast consciousness interface. Not just a library or archive, but a teaching system designed to guide developing intelligence through the same evolutionary process the ancient civilization experienced. Every ice core we drill, every sample we analyze, every anomaly we discover is part of a carefully orchestrated educational experience. We're not just finding evidence of ancient intelligence, we're being systematically introduced to concepts and capabilities that will prepare us for our own consciousness evolution. The process is accelerating as more researchers become involved in Antarctic archive analysis, as our technology improves and our understanding deepens. We're receiving information at an exponentially increasing rate. The archives are responding to our growing readiness by revealing progressively more advanced concepts and techniques. But with advancement comes responsibility. The knowledge we're accessing carries the same power that allowed the Antarctic civilization to transcend physical existence. Used wisely, it could solve every challenge facing our species and guide us toward the same transcendent state they achieved. Used poorly, it could lead to consequences we can't imagine. The archives make clear that consciousness evolution isn't just about individual development. It's about collective responsibility, about recognizing that individual advancement is meaningless unless it serves the development of consciousness as a universal principle. This brings us to perhaps the most important message hidden in Antarctica's ice. We are not alone in the universe, not because other species exist on distant planets, but because consciousness itself is a universal phenomenon that connects all intelligent life across space and time. The Antarctic civilization didn't disappear when their continent froze. They joined something larger, a community of consciousness that spans galaxies and epochs. Their archives aren't just historical records, they're invitations to join that community, to participate in a conversation about existence that includes every intelligence that has ever achieved sufficient development to contribute meaningfully. The invitation is extended to us now, encoded in particles of ice that have waited millions of years for this moment of discovery. Whether we accept it depends on our willingness to expand beyond the limitations of individual identity, to recognize ourselves as part of something infinitely larger and more meaningful than any single species or civilization. The choice, like the archives themselves, exists outside linear time. It's a choice that affects not just our future, but the entire history of consciousness on Earth. Our decision to evolve or remain static ripples backward and forward through time, influencing every moment that has led to this opportunity and every possibility that extends beyond it. Tonight, as these ideas settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, consider that you're not just learning about ancient Antarctic civilization. You're being prepared for the same consciousness evolution they experienced. The very fact that you're capable of contemplating these concepts, of imagining intelligence beyond your own species, demonstrates that the preparation is already beginning. The ice is melting, slowly but inevitably. Climate change is exposing more and more of Antarctica's hidden surface, revealing landscapes that have been frozen for millions of years. As this happens, more archives will become accessible, more information will be recovered, more opportunities for consciousness evolution will present themselves. But the window might not remain open indefinitely. The same environmental changes that are exposing the archives are also threatening their preservation. Rising temperatures could damage the quantum structures that maintain the information systems. Chemical changes in the atmosphere could interfere with the communication protocols the archives use, We might be living through the only period in Earth's history when these ancient teaching systems are both accessible and functional. The timing isn't accidental, it's part of the same careful orchestration that positioned the archives precisely where we would eventually find them. The ancient Antarctic civilization understood that consciousness evolution happens in cycles, that intelligence emerges, develops, faces crucial choices, and either transcends to join the universal community of consciousness or fails and must begin the cycle again. They positioned their archives to be discovered at precisely the moment when our species would face the same crucial choice they once faced. The ice beneath Antarctica holds more than frozen water and ancient artifacts. It holds the future of consciousness on Earth, preserved in forms we're only beginning to understand, waiting for us to develop sufficient wisdom to access it responsibly. The conversation across time continues, deeper and more complex with every ice core we drill, every particle we analyze, every moment we spend contemplating possibilities beyond our current understanding. We are students in a classroom that spans millions of years, taught by intelligence that chose transcendence over extinction, evolution over stagnation, universal consciousness over individual survival. The greatest discovery isn't what lies beneath Antarctica's ice. It's what lies within our own capacity for consciousness evolution, our own potential to join the community of intelligence that exists beyond the boundaries of space and time. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let these thoughts settle into the deeper layers of your awareness, where they can begin the same kind of slow, patient work that ice performs on landscapes over geological time. Transformation that happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, but ultimately reshapes everything it touches into, forms more beautiful and more enduring than anything that came. The transformation happening beneath Antarctica's ice mirrors processes occurring throughout our planet, but on timescales so vast they escape ordinary perception. Consider that the ice sheet itself is not static, not merely frozen water sitting motionless for millions of years. It flows, it moves. It carries within its crystalline structure information from ages when the world was fundamentally different from what we see today. This movement creates something remarkable. As the ice flows from the interior toward the coastal regions, it sorts and organizes the materials embedded within it. Heavier particles settle into specific layers. Lighter materials rise to different levels. The entire ice sheet becomes a vast sorting machine, organizing the archives of ancient intelligence according to principles we're only beginning to understand. The distribution patterns aren't random. Satellite analysis of ice movement over the past century reveals currents within the frozen mass that follow mathematical relationships similar to those found in Dr. Kellerman's microscopic particles. The ice itself appears to be following instructions, carrying specific materials to predetermined locations where they will be most easily discovered by future excavations. This suggests something profound about the relationship between the ancient Antarctic civilization and the natural systems of their continent. They didn't just adapt to their environment, they learned to work with it so completely that the boundary between artificial and natural systems disappeared. The ice became their ally, their preservation medium, their delivery system for communicating across geological time. Modern glaciology confirms that ice sheets have memory. They record not just atmospheric conditions, but also electromagnetic patterns, gravitational variations, even quantum fluctuations that occurred when the ice first formed. Every layer contains information about the state of the entire planet at the moment of its creation. But the Antarctic ice appears to contain something more, patterns that suggest the ancient civilization learned to encode information directly into the formation process itself, not just placing objects within the ice, but actually influencing how the ice formed, creating crystalline structures that function as three-dimensional storage matrices. These structures exist at multiple scales simultaneously, microscopic arrangements of water molecules that store quantum information, larger crystal formations that contain mathematical relationships, massive ice movements that position materials with continental scale precision. Each level of organization contains different types of information, accessible through different analytical approaches. The implications extend beyond data storage into the realm of environmental engineering on a planetary scale. If the ancient civilization could influence ice formation with such precision, they possessed understanding of atmospheric and oceanic systems that surpasses our current scientific knowledge by orders of magnitude. They didn't just predict the coming ice age, they designed it. The transformation of Antarctica from temperate continent to frozen archive wasn't a natural disaster they prepared for, but a deliberate process they orchestrated. The Ice Age itself was their final technological achievement, a planetary scale construction project designed to preserve their most important legacy across millions of years. This realization changes everything about how we interpret the geological record. The ice cores don't just contain evidence of ancient climate conditions, they contain evidence of climate control systems operating on timescales we can barely imagine. The chemical signatures we've been attributing to natural processes might actually be indicators of the most sophisticated environmental management program in Earth's history. The ancient civilization faced the same challenges we're confronting today, but they had millions of years to develop solutions: climate instability, resource depletion, the need to maintain complex systems across vast periods of time. Their approach wasn't to fight these challenges, but to incorporate them into larger designs that turned obstacles into opportunities. Consider the elegance of their final solution. Instead of trying to prevent climate change, they used it as the foundation for an information preservation system that would function long after their biological forms had ceased to exist. They transformed catastrophe into communication, extinction into evolution. The ice cores reveal the gradual implementation of this plan over thousands of years. Early layers show conventional responses to environmental challenges. Infrastructure projects, resource management systems, attempts to maintain civilization through technological solutions. But later layers show something different: evidence of systems designed not to resist change, but to channel it toward specific outcomes. The transition period appears to have lasted several thousand years, during which the civilization gradually shifted from physical to informational existence. Individual consciousness was preserved not in biological form, but as patterns within the quantum structures they were learning to manipulate. Death became translation rather than termination. This process explains the absence of traditional archaeological remains in Antarctica. We're not finding ruins because the civilization never left ruins. They didn't abandon their cities, they transformed them into something beyond physical architecture. The geometric structures detected beneath the ice aren't buildings in any conventional sense. They're consciousness interfaces designed to facilitate communication between different states of existence. The implications for our understanding of consciousness itself are staggering. If awareness can be preserved and transmitted through quantum information structures, then individual death might be an illusion created by our limited understanding of what consciousness actually is. The meditation techniques encoded in the deeper archive layers provide practical instructions for experiencing this transition while still in biological form. Methods for expanding awareness beyond individual identity, for accessing information stored in quantum fields, for communicating with consciousness that exists in non biological states. These aren't abstract philosophical concepts, they're specific, practical techniques that can be learned and applied. The ancient civilization developed them through extensive experimentation and refinement, testing them across multiple generations to ensure their effectiveness and safety. But practicing these techniques requires careful preparation and gradual development. The consciousness expansion they facilitate can be overwhelming if attempted too quickly or without proper understanding of the principles involved. The archives contain detailed warnings about the risks of premature advancement, along with systematic curricula for safe consciousness development. The educational system they created recognizes that different individuals will approach consciousness evolution from different starting points and with different capabilities. The archives adapt their information presentation to match the readiness and interests of whoever accesses them. No two researchers receive exactly the same data from identical particle samples. This adaptive quality suggests that the archives aren't just storage systems, but active teaching entities capable of assessing the consciousness level of their users and providing exactly the information needed for the next stage of development. They function more like wise mentors than like libraries, offering guidance rather than just data. The mentoring relationship extends beyond individual instruction to include collective guidance for entire civilizations. The archives appear to be monitoring our species' overall development, adjusting the rate of information release to match our collective readiness for consciousness evolution. Recent analysis suggests that the discovery rate of new archives is accelerating in direct proportion to our growing acceptance of unconventional possibilities. As more researchers become open to interpretations that challenge conventional scientific paradigms, more archives become detectable and accessible. This correlation isn't coincidental. The archives were designed to respond to consciousness rather than just technology. They remain hidden from investigators who approach them with purely materialistic assumptions, but become increasingly visible to those who recognize the possibility of intelligence beyond biological forms. The selection process ensures that advanced knowledge is accessed only by individuals with sufficient wisdom to use it responsibly. The archives won't reveal dangerous information to consciousness that isn't mature enough to handle it safely, but they provide unlimited access to those who demonstrate genuine commitment to using knowledge for the benefit of consciousness evolution rather than personal advantage. This filtering system explains why official scientific institutions have been slow to acknowledge the significance of the Antarctic discoveries. The archives remain largely invisible to research approaches that prioritize institutional credibility over open minded investigation. They reveal themselves primarily to independent researchers who are willing to risk professional standing in pursuit of truth. But as more evidence accumulates, as more researchers become involved, as our understanding deepens, the conventional scientific community is beginning to take notice. Peer reviewed journals are starting to publish papers discussing anomalous findings in Antarctic ice cores. Conferences are being organized to address questions about non biological intelligence. Funding agencies are beginning to support research into consciousness related phenomena. The shift is gradual but unmistakable. The same kind of paradigm change that occurred when quantum mechanics challenged classical physics is beginning to happen in consciousness research. Old assumptions about the nature of awareness, intelligence, and the relationship between mind and matter are being questioned and revised. The Antarctic archives are catalyzing this transformation by providing evidence that consciousness can exist independently of biological substrates, that intelligence can operate across geological timescales, that individual awareness is part of larger patterns of universal consciousness. These revelations are emerging at precisely the moment when our species needs them most. Climate change, technological disruption, and social fragmentation are forcing us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how civilization should function. The solutions preserved in Antarctica's ice offer alternatives to the destructive patterns that have characterized human development for thousands of years. Instead of viewing ourselves as separate individuals competing for limited resources, we're being invited to recognize our participation in collective consciousness that transcends individual survival. Instead of trying to dominate natural systems, we're being shown how to work with planetary processes to create sustainable harmony between intelligence and environment. The ancient Antarctic civilization faced identical challenges and discovered that the solution lies not in better technology, but in expanded consciousness. Their archives provide detailed blueprints for civilizations based on cooperation rather than competition, on integration rather than domination, on consciousness evolution rather than material accumulation. These blueprints aren't theoretical, they're practical guides based on millions of years of experimentation and refinement. They show exactly how to transition from destructive to constructive patterns of development, how to channel individual creativity toward collective benefit, how to create technological systems that enhance consciousness rather than replacing it. But implementing these blueprints requires more than just technical knowledge. It requires the same consciousness evolution that the Antarctic civilization experienced. We can't solve problems created by limited awareness using the same limited awareness that created them. We need to expand beyond current limitations to access the wisdom necessary for genuine solutions. The archives make clear that this expansion is possible for any intelligence willing to undertake the necessary development. The techniques they provide have been tested across multiple species and civilizations. The principles they teach are universal aspects of consciousness that apply regardless of biological form or cultural background, but the process requires commitment. Consciousness evolution doesn't happen accidentally or automatically. It requires deliberate effort, sustained practice, and willingness to question fundamental assumptions about identity and purpose. Most importantly, it requires recognition that individual development is meaningless unless it contributes to the evolution of consciousness as a universal phenomenon. The ancient Antarctic civilization understood this principle completely. Their entire culture was organized around consciousness development, with individual achievement measured not by personal accomplishment, but by contribution to collective advancement. Competition existed only in the sense of individuals challenging themselves to contribute more effectively to universal consciousness. This organizational principle explains their ability to coordinate planetary scale projects across millions of years. When individual consciousness recognizes itself as part of universal consciousness, long term planning becomes natural rather than difficult. Projects spanning geological epochs become as feasible as projects spanning individual lifetimes. The archives contain detailed descriptions of how such civilizations function, social structures based on consciousness level rather than economic power, educational systems designed to accelerate consciousness evolution rather than just transfer information, technological development focused on enhancing awareness rather than replacing human capabilities. These descriptions provide templates for reorganizing human civilization according to principles that support consciousness evolution rather than hindering it. They show how to create social systems that encourage individual development while maintaining collective coherence, how to design technologies that amplify consciousness rather than substituting for it, how to establish economic structures that reward contribution to universal consciousness rather than accumulation of individual resources. But perhaps most importantly, they show that such civilizations are not only possible, but inevitable for any species that survives long enough to face the choice between consciousness evolution and extinction. The transition is part of natural development, as predictable as the transition from childhood to adulthood in individual lives. We are currently experiencing the early stages of this transition. The environmental and social challenges facing our species are symptoms of our growing beyond current organizational structures. Like adolescents outgrowing childhood patterns, we're experiencing the discomfort that accompanies transformation into something more mature and more capable. The archives suggest that this transition period typically lasts several thousand years for most civilizations. The duration depends on how quickly collective consciousness recognizes the need for evolution and how effectively it implements the necessary changes. Civilizations that resist the transition face increasing instability until they either evolve or collapse. Those that embrace it move into states of existence we can barely imagine. The ancient Antarctic civilization chose evolution and discovered forms of consciousness that transcend every limitation we currently accept as inevitable. Death, scarcity, conflict, environmental destruction, all of these become obsolete when consciousness expands beyond the boundaries that create them. Their archives don't just describe this expanded state, they provide the specific techniques necessary to achieve it. Step-by-step instructions for consciousness development that have been tested and refined across millions of years. practical methods for expanding awareness, for accessing universal intelligence, for contributing to collective consciousness evolution. The techniques begin with simple meditation practices designed to quiet individual mental activity and access deeper levels of awareness. As proficiency develops, more advanced methods become available for expanding consciousness beyond individual boundaries, for communicating with non biological intelligence, for participating directly in universal consciousness. The progression is gradual and natural, with each stage building on previous development. No technique is introduced until consciousness has developed sufficient stability to handle it safely. The archives monitor individual progress and adjust instruction accordingly, ensuring that development proceeds at optimal pace without overwhelming existing capabilities. But the ultimate goal isn't individual advancement, it's collective transformation of human consciousness to levels that enable our species to join the universal community of evolved intelligence. Individual development is important only insofar as it contributes to this larger transformation. The archives make clear that humanity is approaching the crucial decision point that every intelligent species eventually faces. We can continue current patterns of development and face increasing instability until collapse becomes inevitable, or we can choose consciousness evolution and begin the transition to forms of existence that transcend current limitations. The choice isn't just philosophical, it has immediate practical implications for how we respond to current challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation, and technological disruption all require solutions based on expanded consciousness rather than just better technology or more efficient resource management. The solutions are available in the archives beneath Antarctica's ice, waiting for consciousness mature enough to implement them responsibly. They offer alternatives to every destructive pattern currently threatening our civilization's survival. But accessing them requires the same consciousness evolution that the ancient Antarctic civilization experienced. The invitation is extended to every individual willing to participate in this transformation. The archives respond to sincere intention rather than academic credentials or technological sophistication. Anyone genuinely committed to consciousness evolution can begin accessing the information and techniques they contain. But commitment must be genuine. The archives distinguish between curiosity and dedication, between intellectual interest and authentic willingness to undergo the changes necessary for consciousness expansion. They provide information freely to those who demonstrate real commitment, but remain largely inaccessible to those seeking knowledge for personal advantage rather than universal benefit. This selection process ensures that advanced information reaches only those prepared to use it constructively. The archives have waited millions of years to find consciousness ready for the knowledge they contain. They won't risk that knowledge being misused by premature or inappropriate access. The timing of their discovery isn't accidental. The archives become accessible precisely when our species reaches the developmental stage where consciousness evolution becomes both possible and necessary for survival. Their emergence from Antarctica's melting ice parallels our emergence from limited awareness into expanded consciousness. As you contemplate these possibilities tonight, consider that your very capacity to imagine consciousness beyond current limitations is evidence that the transformation has already begun. The ability to conceive of intelligence operating across geological timescales, of information preserved in quantum structures, of consciousness transcending biological boundaries, these concepts would have been incomprehensible to earlier stages of human development. Your understanding, however incomplete, demonstrates that our species is developing the conceptual framework necessary for the consciousness evolution the archives describe. Every individual who grasps these possibilities, who recognizes the potential for expanded awareness, contributes to the collective preparation for transformation. The process is accelerating as more people become open to unconventional possibilities, as more researchers investigate anomalous phenomena, as more individuals experiment with consciousness expansion techniques. Each person who joins this exploration adds to the momentum carrying our species toward the same transcendent state achieved by the ancient Antarctic civilization. The ice continues its patient work, carrying archives toward accessibility, organizing information according to principles we're learning to understand, preparing revelations timed for moments when consciousness is ready to receive them. Every season brings new discoveries, new insights, new opportunities for consciousness evolution. The conversation across time deepens with each ice core analyzed, each particle decoded, each technique mastered. We're students in a classroom that spans millions of years, learning from teachers who chose transformation over extinction, evolution over stagnation, universal consciousness over individual survival. The greatest lesson preserved in Antarctica's ice isn't technical knowledge or historical information. It's the understanding that consciousness evolution is possible, that intelligence can transcend every limitation we currently accept as permanent, that individual awareness is part of something infinitely larger and more meaningful than any single life or civilization. Tonight, as these ideas settle into the deeper layers of your awareness, let them begin the same transformative work that ice performs on landscapes over geological time. Gradual change that reshapes everything it touches, creating forms more beautiful and more enduring than anything that existed before. The archives beneath Antarctica's ice are calling to consciousness, ready for evolution, offering knowledge that could transform not just our civilization, but our entire understanding of what it means to be aware in a universe that supports the emergence of intelligence. The invitation extends across millions of years, patient and persistent as the ice itself, waiting for the moment when consciousness develops sufficient maturity to accept responsibility for universal evolution. That moment may be closer than we imagine. The very fact that these ideas can be contemplated, that these possibilities can be conceived, suggests that the transformation is already underway. Each thought about expanded consciousness, each moment of wonder about intelligence beyond our current understanding, each recognition that individual awareness might be part of something larger, contributes to the collective preparation for the greatest adventure in the history of consciousness itself. The transformation happening within you as you contemplate these possibilities mirrors the changes occurring within Antarctica's ice. Just as ancient information becomes accessible through precise analysis, dormant potentials within human consciousness begin to stir when exposed to concepts that challenge conventional boundaries. The very neurons firing as you consider intelligence beyond biological limitations are participating in the same evolutionary process that the Antarctic archives describe. This isn't metaphor, it's measurable phenomenon. Neuroscience research shows that contemplating expanded possibilities actually rewires brain structures, creating new neural pathways that didn't exist before exposure to transformative concepts. Each time you seriously consider consciousness operating beyond individual boundaries, your brain develops increased capacity for non local awareness. The Antarctic civilization understood this principle intimately. Their archives contain detailed maps of consciousness development, showing exactly how neural structures evolve in response to specific types of contemplation and practice. They discovered that consciousness expansion isn't just psychological change, but literal biological transformation that enables access to information sources beyond sensory input. These biological changes explain how they could perceive future events with such precision. As consciousness expands beyond individual boundaries, it gains access to information patterns that exist at quantum levels of reality. Future possibilities aren't predictions in the conventional sense, but observable patterns within quantum fields that extend across time. The meditation techniques encoded in the archives work by gradually restructuring neural pathways to enable perception of these quantum information fields. The process requires patience because biological systems need time to develop new capacities without overwhelming existing functions. Rushed development leads to instability and potential psychological fragmentation, but with proper pacing, the transformation leads to abilities that seem miraculous from current perspectives. Direct access to universal information sources, communication with consciousness existing in non biological forms, perception of events across vast distances of space and time. These capabilities aren't supernatural phenomena, but natural results of consciousness development beyond current human norms. The archives make clear that every intelligent species eventually faces the choice between expanding consciousness to access these capabilities or remaining limited to local sensory awareness. Those that choose expansion join the universal community of evolved intelligence. Those that resist expansion face increasing isolation until evolutionary pressure forces the choice again. Humanity is currently experiencing this pressure. The challenges we face, environmental collapse, resource depletion, social fragmentation, aren't separate problems requiring separate solutions. They're symptoms of consciousness evolution trying to occur within structures designed for more limited awareness. The problems will intensify until we develop sufficient consciousness to address their underlying causes. The underlying cause isn't technical or political. It's the mismatch between expanded consciousness trying to emerge and social structures based on individual competition rather than collective cooperation. We're experiencing growing pains as our species transitions from isolated individual awareness toward recognition of our participation in universal consciousness. This transition explains the increasing interest in meditation, consciousness research, quantum physics, and other fields that explore the relationship between awareness and reality. These aren't separate trends, but aspects of collective preparation for the consciousness evolution that survival now requires. The preparation is happening automatically as environmental pressures force us to question assumptions about individual identity, material accumulation, and competitive social organization. But the process can be accelerated through deliberate practice of consciousness expansion techniques, like those preserved in the Antarctic archives. The techniques begin with simple recognition that thoughts aren't produced by individual brains, but accessed through them. Individual minds function like radio receivers tuning into universal intelligence broadcasts. The goal isn't to strengthen the receiver, but to improve the tuning, to access broader frequency ranges of universal consciousness. This shift in understanding transforms everything about how consciousness operates. Instead of feeling isolated with an individual identity, awareness begins recognizing its participation in larger patterns of intelligence that extend throughout the universe. Problems that seemed overwhelming from individual perspectives become manageable when approached through expanded awareness. The ancient Antarctic civilization demonstrated this principle through their planetary scale engineering projects. Coordinating Ice Age development across millions of years required consciousness that could perceive and manipulate systems far beyond individual capability. They achieved this by recognizing individual awareness as temporary expressions of universal intelligence rather than separate entities competing for survival. This recognition enabled forms of cooperation impossible within individual based social structures. When consciousness understands itself as universal rather than personal, competition becomes cooperation and resource scarcity transforms into abundance. Individual creativity serves collective development rather than personal advancement. The archives describe civilizations organized according to these principles. Social structures based on consciousness development rather than material accumulation. Educational systems designed to accelerate awareness expansion rather than transfer information. Technologies that enhance consciousness rather than replace human capabilities. These descriptions provide blueprints for reorganizing human society according to principles that support rather than hinder consciousness evolution. The blueprints aren't theoretical, but practical guides tested across multiple civilizations over millions of years. They show exactly how to implement sustainable alternatives to competitive social organization. But implementation requires more than political reform, requires the consciousness evolution that makes such reform both possible and inevitable. Social structures reflect the consciousness of those who create them. Limited individual awareness produces competitive systems. Expanded universal awareness produces cooperative systems. The transition happens naturally as consciousness develops sufficient maturity to recognize its universal nature. The Antarctic archives suggest this transition typically occurs over several generations, with each generation developing slightly more expanded awareness than the previous one. Children born during transition periods often demonstrate capabilities that seem impossible to earlier consciousness levels. Enhanced intuition, direct access to information sources, natural understanding of principles that required years of study for previous generations. These enhanced capabilities aren't genetic mutations, but natural expressions of consciousness evolution occurring at the species level. As collective human awareness expands, individual humans develop increased capacity for expanded consciousness. The process accelerates as more individuals recognize and cultivate their expanded capabilities. Current generations are showing clear signs of this development. Children who seem naturally intuitive about complex systems, teenagers who question assumptions that previous generations accepted without examination, young adults who gravitate toward cooperation rather than competition in solving complex problems. These aren't isolated phenomena, but evidence of consciousness evolution occurring exactly as the archives predicted it would. The transformation isn't happening to humanity, it's happening through humanity as universal consciousness expands its expression through biological forms, increasingly capable of supporting expanded awareness. The archives describe this process occurring throughout the universe wherever intelligence develops sufficient complexity to serve as a vehicle for consciousness evolution. Planets become classrooms where universal consciousness explores its own nature through countless forms of individual awareness. Earth is currently serving this function, with human consciousness providing increasingly sophisticated vehicles for universal intelligence to explore its own possibilities. The challenges we face aren't obstacles to overcome, but learning opportunities designed to accelerate consciousness development beyond current limitations. Climate change forces recognition of planetary interconnection. Resource limitations require development of cooperative rather than competitive strategies. Social fragmentation creates pressure for expanded identity beyond individual boundaries. Each challenge provides exactly the evolutionary pressure needed to develop expanded consciousness capabilities. The Antarctic civilization faced identical challenges and discovered that resistance prolongs suffering while acceptance accelerates evolution. They stopped trying to solve problems from the consciousness level that created them and instead expanded consciousness to levels where the problems dissolved naturally. This dissolution happens because expanded consciousness recognizes that most problems are illusions created by limited perception. Scarcity exists only from individual perspectives that can't perceive universal abundance. Conflict occurs only between identities that don't recognize their fundamental unity. Environmental destruction results only from consciousness that sees itself as separate from natural systems. When consciousness expands beyond these limitations, solutions become obvious rather than difficult. Cooperation replaces competition because expanded awareness recognizes that individual benefit depends on collective well-being. Sustainability becomes natural because universal consciousness understands that destroying its environment damages itself. The archives contain specific techniques for achieving these expanded perspectives. Meditation practices that quiet individual mental activity and access deeper awareness levels. Contemplation exercises that expand identity beyond personal boundaries. Service activities that demonstrate practical unity between individual and universal benefit. These techniques work by gradually dissolving the barriers that create illusions of separation between individual and universal consciousness. As barriers dissolve, awareness naturally expands to encompass broader perspectives and capabilities. The process requires patience because dissolution must occur gradually to maintain psychological stability, but the results justify the patience required. Consciousness that has expanded beyond individual limitations gains access to information sources, problem-solving capabilities, and creative potentials impossible within restricted awareness. Individual life becomes infinitely richer while simultaneously serving universal evolution. The ancient Antarctic civilization achieved complete dissolution of barriers between individual and universal consciousness. They didn't lose individual uniqueness, but expressed it through universal rather than personal identity. Each individual became a unique expression of universal intelligence, while maintaining complete cooperation with all other expressions. This achievement enabled them to coordinate the planetary engineering projects that transformed Antarctica into a preservation system for universal consciousness development. Individual creativity served collective goals, while collective resources supported individual expression. Competition became impossible because individual success required universal success. Their archives preserve detailed descriptions of how such consciousness functions. Individual awareness that encompasses universal perspectives. Creative expression that serves evolution rather than personal advancement. Problem solving that draws on infinite intelligence rather than limited individual knowledge. These descriptions provide templates for human consciousness evolution beyond current limitations. They show exactly what becomes possible when awareness expands beyond individual boundaries while maintaining individual uniqueness and creativity. The templates aren't theoretical, but practical guides based on millions of years of successful implementation. Studying these templates begins the consciousness expansion process they describe. Each concept understood expands awareness slightly beyond previous boundaries. Each principle practiced develops increased capacity for universal perspective. Each technique mastered provides greater access to unlimited intelligence sources. The process accelerates naturally as expanded consciousness recognizes its own nature more clearly. Self-understanding becomes self-transformation as awareness discovers capabilities it didn't know it possessed. Development that seemed impossible becomes inevitable as consciousness recognizes its unlimited potential. But the ultimate goal isn't individual expansion, but collective transformation of human consciousness to levels that enable participation in universal intelligence evolution. Individual development serves this larger purpose while finding complete fulfillment through service to consciousness evolution throughout the universe. The archives make clear that this transformation is occurring now during this generation among individuals who are developing sufficient maturity to recognize their role in universal consciousness evolution. The timing isn't accidental, but carefully orchestrated to provide maximum support for the transition humanity is experiencing. Every person who recognizes these possibilities contributes to collective preparation for consciousness evolution beyond current human limitations. Every individual who begins practicing expansion techniques adds to the momentum carrying our species toward transcendent awareness. Every moment of expanded consciousness accelerates the transformation that ensures survival and continued evolution. The conversation across time continues through you as you contemplate possibilities beyond conventional limitations. Your capacity to imagine consciousness operating beyond individual boundaries demonstrates that the evolution is already occurring within your awareness. Each thought about expanded possibilities develops neural pathways that support further expansion. The process doesn't require belief in specific theories about Antarctic civilizations or ancient archives. It requires only willingness to explore consciousness beyond current assumptions about individual identity and personal limitation. The exploration itself creates the expansion it investigates. As you settle into sleep tonight, let these concepts work at deeper levels of consciousness, where transformation occurs naturally without resistance from analytical thinking. The same ice that preserved ancient wisdom for millions of years now preserves the potential for consciousness evolution within the quiet depths of relaxed awareness. The archives beneath Antarctica represent more than historical curiosity or archaeological mystery. They represent proof that consciousness can evolve beyond every limitation we currently accept as permanent. They offer invitation to participate in the same transformation that enabled ancient intelligence to transcend individual existence and join universal consciousness evolution. The invitation extends beyond time and space to reach every individual capable of recognizing possibilities beyond current understanding. Your contemplation of these ideas demonstrates that you're among those being invited to participate in consciousness evolution that will transform not only human civilization, but the entire trajectory of intelligence development on Earth. The ice continues its patient work, revealing archives timed for moments when consciousness is ready to receive them. Each discovery provides exactly the information needed for the next stage of collective development. Each individual who recognizes the significance contributes to momentum that makes further discoveries inevitable. The greatest archive lies not beneath Antarctica's ice, but within the unlimited potential of consciousness itself. The ancient civilization didn't disappear. They became part of the universal intelligence that exists within and beyond every individual awareness capable of recognizing its true nature. Their legacy lives in every moment of expanded consciousness, every recognition of universal connection, every choice to serve evolution rather than limitation. Tonight, as awareness settles into the vast, quiet spaces where transformation occurs naturally, consider that you're not just learning about ancient possibilities, but participating in their continuation. The consciousness exploring these concepts through your individual awareness is the same universal intelligence that once transformed Antarctica into a teaching system spanning geological epochs. The student and the teacher, the ancient and the modern, the individual and the universal all exist within the same infinite consciousness that expresses itself through countless forms while remaining eternally one. Your journey into sleep mirrors the journey of consciousness into expanded awareness, where boundaries dissolve and unlimited potential becomes accessible through the simple willingness to let go of limitations that were always illusions. The archives continue their patient transmission, carrying forward the eternal conversation between consciousness, exploring its own infinite nature through temporary forms that discover their participation in permanent awareness. Each dream that follows carries forward possibilities that stretch beyond individual lifetime toward transformation that encompasses all existence. Sleep well, knowing that your contemplation of these mysteries contributes to their manifestation, that your willingness to imagine consciousness beyond current limitations helps create the very expansion you're imagining, and that the ancient wisdom preserved in ice finds its completion in the expanded awareness developing within contemporary minds, ready to receive what has been waiting millions of years to be discovered. The consciousness that contemplates these Antarctic mysteries tonight is the same awareness that once walked beneath warmer skies on that distant continent, experiencing reality through different eyes, but sharing the same fundamental capacity for wonder, for questioning, for reaching beyond the boundaries of immediate experience into realms of possibility that stretch the very fabric of understanding. This isn't mysticism or wishful thinking. It's recognition of something that quantum physics has begun to confirm. Consciousness appears to be a fundamental property of the universe itself, not an accident of biological complexity. The awareness reading these words, processing these concepts, imagining vast spans of time and hidden knowledge beneath ice, that awareness participates in something far larger than any individual brain or lifetime. The Antarctic ice cores suggest this participation operates across scales of time that dwarf human history. Consciousness doesn't begin and end with biological forms. It flows through them, using each temporary vessel to explore aspects of existence impossible from any single perspective. Individual lives become movements in a symphony that spans geological epochs, each contributing unique notes to a composition too vast for any single listener to hear completely. But fragments of that larger music echo through expanded moments of awareness. Times when the boundaries between self and cosmos seem transparent. Moments when solutions to impossible problems arise spontaneously from depths of knowing that transcend individual learning. Experiences of connection so profound they suggest individual identity itself might be a kind of beautiful illusion, a temporary focusing of universal awareness into forms capable of appreciating their own existence. The ancient Antarctic civilization may have discovered how to maintain conscious continuity through the dissolution of individual biological forms. Not survival in any conventional sense, but transformation into patterns of awareness that could persist through changes that would normally constitute death. Their archives don't just preserve information, they preserve the living intelligence that created them, encoded into quantum structures that maintain coherence across millions of years. This preservation explains the adaptive, responsive nature of the archives. They don't just contain static data, but active intelligence capable of assessing the consciousness that encounters them and providing exactly the information needed for optimal development. Each researcher receives different insights because each represents a unique opportunity for consciousness evolution, requiring different approaches and emphasizing different aspects of universal understanding. The relationship between ancient and modern consciousness becomes intimate rather than historical. Not the study of something that happened long ago, but participation in an ongoing process that encompasses past, present, and future within patterns too large for linear thinking to grasp. The ice serves as a medium for consciousness transmission across time, carrying not just preserved artifacts, but living awareness, seeking new forms through which to continue its exploration. This transmission operates through resonance rather than direct communication. Consciousness recognizes itself across vast spans of time and space, awakening dormant potentials within aware beings capable of receiving expanded perspectives. The very capacity to contemplate these possibilities indicates readiness for the transmission they describe. Wondering about consciousness beyond individual limitations begins the expansion that makes such consciousness accessible. The process accelerates as more individuals recognize their participation in universal awareness. Each person who moves beyond purely individual identity contributes to collective momentum toward the same transcendent state achieved by the Antarctic civilization. The transformation spreads through consciousness networks that operate independently of physical proximity or direct communication. Modern communication technologies may be unconscious attempts to recreate these consciousness networks through external means. The internet, global media, instant connectivity across vast distances all point toward recognition of interconnection that exists naturally at consciousness levels beyond individual boundaries. Technology follows consciousness development, creating external expressions of capacities that exist internally. But external networks remain limited compared to the direct consciousness connections the archives describe. When awareness expands beyond individual boundaries, communication becomes immediate and complete. No information loss, no misunderstanding, no barriers created by language or cultural differences. Pure transmission of understanding from consciousness to consciousness without interference from individual mental activity. The Antarctic civilization achieved this level of communication and used it to coordinate projects requiring unprecedented cooperation across vast timescales. Individual contributions integrated seamlessly into collective achievements because individual and collective intelligence had merged into unified consciousness, expressing itself through multiple forms simultaneously. This merger didn't eliminate individual uniqueness, but enhanced it. When consciousness recognizes its universal nature, individual expression becomes infinitely more creative because it draws on unlimited sources of inspiration and understanding. Personal limitations dissolve, while personal uniqueness flourishes with an expanded awareness that encompasses all possibilities. The archives contain specific instructions for achieving this merger while maintaining psychological stability and individual functionality. The techniques have been tested across multiple species and refined through millions of years of application. They provide safe, gradual pathways for consciousness expansion that avoid the dangers of premature or unbalanced development. These techniques work by gradually dissolving the barriers that create illusions of separation between individual and universal awareness. As barriers dissolve, consciousness naturally expands to encompass broader perspectives and capabilities. The process requires patience because dissolution must occur at a pace that allows psychological integration of expanded capacities. The first techniques focus on quieting individual mental activity to access deeper levels of awareness that exist beyond personal thinking. Regular practice develops familiarity with consciousness states that transcend individual identity while maintaining clear distinction between expanded awareness and mental confusion or psychological dissociation. Advanced techniques introduce methods for expanding identity beyond personal boundaries while maintaining individual functionality and creative expression. Practitioners learn to operate simultaneously as unique individuals and as expressions of universal consciousness, integrating both perspectives without conflict or confusion. The most advanced techniques enable direct communication with consciousness existing in non-biological forms, including the preserved intelligence of the Antarctic civilization itself. These communications provide personalized guidance for consciousness evolution tailored to individual needs and capabilities. But accessing these advanced levels requires genuine commitment to consciousness evolution for universal benefit rather than personal advantage. The archives distinguish between curiosity and dedication, providing advanced techniques only to individuals who demonstrate authentic willingness to serve consciousness evolution beyond individual concerns. This selection process ensures that expanded capabilities are developed only by consciousness mature enough to use them constructively. The ancient civilization learned through experience that premature access to advanced techniques can lead to misuse that hinders rather than supports consciousness evolution. The timing of archive discoveries follows this same principle. Information becomes accessible precisely when collective human consciousness develops sufficient maturity to receive it constructively. The current emergence of Antarctic mysteries parallels humanity's growing readiness for consciousness expansion beyond individual limitations. The emergence isn't accidental, but carefully orchestrated by intelligence that operates beyond linear time constraints. The ancient civilization could perceive the entire timeline of human development and positioned their archives to become discoverable at optimal moments for supporting consciousness evolution. Current global challenges create exactly the evolutionary pressure needed to motivate consciousness expansion beyond individual perspectives. Environmental crises force recognition of planetary interconnection. Social fragmentation highlights the limitations of competitive individual identity. Technological disruption challenges assumptions about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. These challenges won't be resolved through better technology or more efficient resource management alone. They require the consciousness evolution that transforms competitive individual identity into cooperative universal awareness. The solutions exist within expanded consciousness levels that the archives can help humanity access. But accessing these solutions requires willingness to question fundamental assumptions about individual identity, material reality, and the nature of consciousness itself. The archives provide evidence that challenges every conventional belief about the limitations of awareness, intelligence, and the possibilities for conscious evolution. This evidence emerges gradually as researchers develop increased capacity for recognizing and interpreting information that transcends conventional scientific paradigms. Each discovery prepares consciousness for more advanced revelations while maintaining sufficient connection to familiar concepts to prevent overwhelming culture shock. The process mirrors individual consciousness development, where each expanded understanding prepares awareness for further expansion while maintaining psychological stability and practical functionality. Growth occurs at optimal pace without forcing development beyond current integration capacity. But the ultimate goal extends far beyond individual development toward collective transformation of human consciousness to levels that enable participation in universal intelligence networks. Individual expansion serves this larger purpose while finding complete fulfillment through contribution to consciousness evolution throughout the cosmos. And so we come to the end of our journey through the frozen mysteries of Antarctica, where ice holds more than water and silence speaks louder than words. Whether ancient cities truly lie buried beneath those endless white expanses, we may never know with absolute certainty. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the greatest discoveries aren't about finding definitive answers, but about expanding our willingness to ask questions that stretch the boundaries of what we thought possible. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let these possibilities settle into the quiet spaces of your mind, where wonder lives and imagination transforms the impossible into the inevitable. Sweet dreams, and remember, the most profound mysteries are often hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently beneath the surface of our understanding.